So the last topic we will look at is how can we with Cucumber test a SOAP web service. So we've seen the REST web service. The idea of a SOAP web service is also a call over HTTP, but it is different that first of all, with SOAP you always send a SOAP envelope. So we can talk 3 days about SOAP. We're only going to look at the basics, and then we're going to look at how we test it. But the idea is that with SOAP you send a request over HTTP, and that request always contains XML. So with SOAP you always use XML, no JSON. And in that envelope, in SOAP you have all kinds of standards for security, addressing, transactions, reliability. There are all kinds of standards so that if we do SOAP with a system from Microsoft or SOAP with a system from IBM, Oracle, that all should work the same. So they have a lot of different standards in SOAP. And then typically in SOAP, so here you see the SOAP envelope, and then here you say I want to call the method add product, and this is the product that I want to add. So the content is always XML. And then every SOAP web service, you can call it to ask, give me your interface. And it's called a WSDL file. WSDL is an XML language to describe an interface. So every SOAP service you can ask, give me your WSDL file, give me your interface. And in that WSDL file it says, well, you can call this method and this is what you have to send and this is what you get back. So here's an example. So like Postman is a tool that's very handy to send, get, put, post and delete HTTP requests. SOAP UI is a very handy tool to test a web service, at least to see how it works. You can also use it for testing. So for example, I have here, let me see, where did I have it? I had somewhere SOAP UI. Yeah, here. Here's SOAP UI. And what I can do with SOAP UI, I can say File, New SOAP Project, and I can type here the URL to the WSDL file of a web service. It's not the right one, so let me get the correct URL here. So this is an URL to the WSDL file of a SOAP calculator that is already on the internet. So if I say OK now, what does SOAP UI do? It goes to that URL and says, give me your interface. And it gets the interface back. And from that interface, it sees, hey, there are different requests and you can send. So for example, this one here, an add request. So if I click on it, then SOAP UI from that WSDL file creates for me already a request that I have to send according to that interface. So you see here I have a SOAP envelope. It has a header, and in the body it says, well, there is an add method. You send an int A and an int B. So in here where you have the question mark, I can just fill in something. So let's fill in 12 and 13. And now I can send this. So this will send this request to the web service, and this is what the response that I get back. So also a SOAP envelope in the body, add response, add result is 25. I can also look, for example, at a multiply. You have to multiply two numbers, so let's say 6 and 7. Let's run it, and that's 42. So SOAP UI is very handy to see how does this SOAP web service work. Let's try it out. How does a request look like? How does a response look like? Now we're going to use this, so this request here and the corresponding response we're going to use in our test when we write our test. Basically what you do, if you want to test this, does my web service work correctly? You just send a request, and there's nothing else than a string. Then you get a response back, and you check if that response is actually what you expected. So here you have the example where I sent the add 3 and 6, and it comes back here with 9. We can also request the WSDL file in a browser, for example, and you see the whole interface description. You see here, for example, I have an add, and in the add there is an int a, that's an integer, there's an int b, that's an integer, you get an add response, and the add response has an add result, and that's an integer. That's exactly the description, the interface description of this. It's basically the XSD. XSD is the structure of your XML file schema. So SOAP UI is very handy to use. So now let's say I want to test my SOAP web services in Java, plain Java. So what we do is we create a request, and that request is just the whole XML structure of the request. So that's a string. Then we create the expected response. That's also a string, a SOAP envelope. Then we have a helper class called HTTP client. HTTP client is a helper class that can send HTTP requests, and then you receive a response. So we send this request that we created, we get back a response. So I have an expected response and I have a received response. Now I have to check if they are the same. Well, for that we use a framework called XML Unit. It's basically unit testing for XML. It's a framework that can see very easily, is this XML the same? So here's an example of XML Unit. So I have here two XML strings, and they are the same. And I can say XML assert, but assert XML equal XML1 and XML2. It compares the two XML strings. This XML assert, this assert XML, this one, this will look also at white spaces. So here I have a carriage return, here I have a carriage return. So the content is exactly the same, only this one has carriage returns and white spaces. So it will, here we have assert XML not equal. It will check they are not equal because there are white spaces in there. So what I can do, I can say XML units, set ignore white spaces on true, and then assert XML equal. And then they should be the same. Here's another example. So I have two XML strings. And here I have, in the person tag, I first have the first name tag and then the last name. In XML2, I first have the last name tag and then the first name. So basically the content is the same, only the order is different. Well, there is a, if you say, so you can make a div object and you give the two XMLs. And if you say div.identical, then it says no, they are not identical. But if you say div.similar, Yes, they are similar. The content is the same. It's both Frank Brown. Well, that's XML unit. There's a lot more, but this is what we're going to use to check if two XML strings are the same. Then we have a helper class, XML or HTTP client. Basically what it does, without looking at the details, so we're going to use this, it has one method, invoke web service. This is the URL, and this is the request. And then it returns the response as a string. That's all it does. Then in our test, so it's just a unit test, calculated test. This is the URL I want to call. And I have a method getRequest. What does it return? A string. So this string I just copy pasted from SoapUI. With the only difference, what did I change, is here the X and the Y. This is what I put in there. And the X and the Y are parameters to the method getRequest. So I can say getRequest 3,4. And it will give me this whole SOAP envelope with in int A it's 3 and in int B it's 4. I can also say getRequest 99,2. So X is 99 and Y is 2. So this is a method that creates a request based on two values. And in a similar way, I created also getExpectedResponse here. Also copy paste from SoapUI with the only difference that I fill in here the result. So create a response based on this result. So that's two convenience methods. And then here's my test. Yeah, so first give me a request with 5,8. Then create a response for me for 13, because that should be, for add, it should be 13. Then I say sample HTTP client invoke web service this URL and this request. And it gives me back a response. And then I say XML unit set ignore white space on true. And then I assert that the response that I got back, is that the same as what I expect? If yes, the test passes. If not, the test fails. And here I do the same with 1 and 2, and it should be 3. So with SOAP, I'm not going to write code to do something with SOAP. The only thing that I do is I make the XML as such that it is a valid SOAP request. I send it to a URL, I get a response back, and I check if that is exactly the same as I expected. This is a test of SOAP in Java. Of course, we're going to do it with Cucumber, but we have to call the same methods, only in different steps. So now we do it in Cucumber. So here I go to the calculator web service, I add value 1 and value 2, the outcome should be results. So here's my example for the scenario outline, this then should be the result. From that I create steps. So, excuse me. So here with Cucumber we've seen you always need this class that you can run as a unit test. And I need my sample HTTP client with the static method invoke web service. Then in my steps, I also have here the method getRequest and getExpectedResponse, similar as we've seen in the plain Java client. And then here are my steps. So the first one, I go to the calculator web service. Well, I don't do anything because I have only one method, sample HTTP client invoke web service. So that should be in the when, because there I do the action. So the given is empty, doesn't do anything. I still need it so that there is a match. Otherwise, Cucumber says there's no match for this text. And then I have add with an argument 1 and add and an argument 2. And say get the request with argument 1 and 2. So that's my request. And then I can say sample HTTP client invoke web service. This is the URL and this is the request. And then I get a response back. The response is a string. So the only thing that I have to do in the then, see if this response is equal to what I expected. So I get the expected response with a certain argument. I set ignore white spaces on true. So here you see an example. We looked at interface design. Well, this one is not correct. Set ignore white spaces on true. True is a Boolean parameter. So why do we have to tell it it's true? Why not set ignore white spaces? Or that's why if you put false there, that means you don't ignore white spaces, but then call it set do not ignore white spaces. You have just two methods. Was a side step. And then we have here the assert equals that the expected response should be the same than the actual response. And then I do the same. I can test my SOAP web services with Cucumber.